It is 1883. A freight train is moving through a winter night in the American Midwest. The temperature is below freezing. The train is doing 40 miles per hour. And on top of the boxcars, not inside, on top, a man is walking. He is not a stowaway. He is a paid railroad employee. This is his job. Most people watching a freight train slow down in the 1880s assume the engineer did it by pulling a lever, applying some central mechanism from the cab. That assumption is completely wrong. For most of the 1800s, the only braking system on an American freight train was that man on the roof. And it was the deadliest civilian job in the industrialized world. Here is what the job actually required. Every car in a freight train had its own brake wheel, a large cast iron handle mounted on top of the car. When the engineer needed to slow down, he blew the whistle. 1 blast meant reduce speed, 2 meant stop. That was the entire communication system. The brakeman heard the signal, started moving, and began turning wheels, 1 per car, working his way from front to back, jumping the gaps between cars while the train was still moving at speed. No railings, no lighting after dark. Uneven footing on wooden roof slats slicked with rain or ice. In winter, those slats were frosted solid. The wind at 40 miles per hour is not background weather. It is a physical force, constant and directional, pushing against every step and every jump. On long trains, multiple brakemen worked in sections, each responsible for a cluster of cars, all moving in rough coordination based on whistle codes. None of them could confirm the others had actually heard. If the man at the far end of the train did not hear the signal, or heard it wrong, or slipped before he reached his wheels, that section of the train kept rolling free. And here is the part that gets overlooked. The brakeman was not pulling one brake. He was orchestrating a sequence across the entire length of the train in real time. Apply the rear brakes before the front section had slowed and the back cars kept pushing into the front. Get the timing wrong and the train could jackknife. The consequences were not limited to him. Getting it wrong meant the whole train. The speed made it urgent. The urgency made the conditions worse. The worst conditions made falling more likely. The whole system pushed toward catastrophe exactly when it was most needed to hold together. The U.S. Department of Labor later put a number to all of this. Between 1877 and 1888, a brakeman was killed every 24 hours. 1 death per day, every day, for a decade. Injury rates were far higher: crushed hands, shattered limbs, frostbite from hours exposed on top of moving cars in January. The railroads tracked these numbers. They published them internally, and they kept operating. Part of what drove the toll was not just the roof walk. Before automatic couplers, connecting rail cars required a worker to stand between 2 cars as they rolled toward each other and drop a metal pin into a moving loop by hand. Miss the timing, and the cars took the hand. Sometimes the arm. This device, the link and pin coupler, was responsible for nearly as many deaths as the falls were. Brakemen were not just in danger on top of the train, they were in danger every time the train assembled. So why did none of this stop? In 1868, 15 years before that man is walking the cars in the dark, a 22-year-old inventor named George Westinghouse filed the patent for an automatic air brake. The concept was straightforward: a pressurized line running the full length of the train connected to every car. When the engineer triggered it from the cab, all brakes applied simultaneously. No roof walk, no whistle codes, no relay timing. The whole train stopped as a unit, controlled by one person, from one seat, in under a second. It worked. Westinghouse demonstrated it publicly. Railroad executives watched it operate, and then most of them went back to using brakemen. This was not confusion, it was math. Retrofitting an entire fleet with air brake hardware cost real money up front. There was no federal mandate to do it. Liability law in the 1880s was narrow enough that railroads rarely paid meaningful damages for worker deaths, and even when they did, the payouts were modest compared to operating costs. Brakemen were easy to hire and legally inexpensive to lose. And here is the part most people miss. No single railroad had a genuine incentive to move first. If one company spent heavily on upgrades while its competitors did not, that company absorbed costs the others avoided. In a competitive market with thin margins, being the first company to care about brakemen was a financial disadvantage. The market structure was actively punishing the company that prioritized safety early. The brakemen themselves understood exactly what was happening. They had organized. The Brotherhood of Brakemen was a real institution, fighting for wages and working conditions. But when air brakes began appearing on certain routes, the Brotherhood did something that looked, from the outside, completely irrational. They lobbied against them, not against unsafe brakes, against AIR brakes, against the technology that would have stopped the deaths. From the outside, that looks like workers voting against their own safety. From the inside, it was something else entirely. A safer version of the brakeman's job was still a brakeman's job. A mechanized version was no job at all. They were not confused about the danger. Every one of them understood the danger better than anyone in a railroad office. They were clear-eyed about what the technology meant. If air brakes became standard, the brakeman was gone. The Brotherhood was not lobbying against a brake. It was lobbying against its own replacement. That is not irrational. That is the most rational calculation a man in that position could make. Congress eventually moved. In 1993, the Railroad Safety Appliance Act passed, mandating air brakes and automatic couplers on all interstate trains. Enforcement deadline, 1900. And here is what matters about the timing. Thousands of men had already died before Washington did anything. The act did not pass because public outrage finally reached a tipping point. It passed because by 1993, the national rail network was large and integrated enough that standardized equipment across the whole system had become genuinely valuable to the railroads themselves, more valuable than the money saved by avoiding retrofit costs. The economics had shifted. The law ended the profession, but the technology had already made it obsolete. The law just made it official. Between 1893 and 1900, there was an odd transition period. Trains on routes where air brakes had been installed still carried brakemen, partly out of institutional habit, partly because enforcement was gradual. These men watched their own job becoming a formality. They still climbed to the roof. They still waited for whistle signals. But the brakes underneath them were now being applied by a pipe, not by them. For the first time in the history of American railroads, the man on the roof was redundant. He just did not have a legal document saying so yet. Walk past a modern freight train and look at the undercarriage. There is a continuous brake line running the full length from locomotive to last car, pressurized, automatic, monitored by sensors, controlled from a single cab. When the engineer applies the brakes, the signal travels through that line at the speed of compressed air. Every car responds. The whole train stops as a single coordinated system. Nobody is on the roof. Nobody has to be. But look closer at a passenger car. Find the emergency brake handle mounted near the door. That handle is a direct descendant of the era when stopping a train required human beings distributed along its length. And the dead man switch, the control that brings a modern train to a halt the instant the engineer releases pressure, exists in part because the original system had no fallback if the person at the controls went down. These are not arbitrary features. They are fossils, engineering decisions that still carry the shape of a problem that was solved over 100 years ago, still visible in the hardware of every train operating today. The brakeman is gone. The problem he solved is not. The brakeman was not banned because the death toll became intolerable. The death toll had been intolerable for a decade before anyone acted. He was banned because a machine made him unnecessary and a law formalized what the technology had already decided. That is the real pattern. Dangerous jobs do not disappear when they become dangerous enough. They disappear when the economics shift. The morality of the situation had been clear since 1877. The action did not come until 1893. Everything that happened between those two dates happened because the math had not yet changed. Every hazardous role that still requires a human being today exists for exactly the same reason the brakeman existed in 1883, not because machines cannot do it, but because no machine available is yet cheap enough, reliable enough, or trusted enough to replace him. The coupler that killed alongside the brakeman, that device has its own buried story, an inventor who deliberately lost fingers demonstrating the problem to people in power, a staged public test designed specifically for a congressional audience, a working solution that sat unused for years because no mandate existed to force adoption. That story starts the same way this one does, with a job so dangerous it seems impossible that anyone kept doing it, and an industry that ran the numbers and decided it could afford to keep going.